Welcome to Family Basics 101. I'm Dr. Bruce McClure, and as we begin the 5-part series entitled Sex, we will look over the next 5 lessons at the topic of first defining sex. What is it? Secondly, we will talk about how to talk to your children about sex. Third, we will talk about sex and the teen years. Fourth, we will look at the topic of sex and young adulthood, meaning sexuality and single life. And then finally, we will talk about sex within marriage. When you hear the word sex, what automatically comes to your mind? For many individuals, sex is seen as an act that is to be performed rather than first being viewed as who the person is. Sexuality is an inherent component of who a person is rather than the act that is done by the person. Oftentimes, sex is defined as a sexual act, a performance. But to clearly understand sex in its purest sense, we must first be clear that the word sex, as we know it today, is from a Latin word, sexus, S-E-X-U-S, which comes from the word seco, S-E-C-O, and that simply means to have, or to divide, or to cut. The reference was to the sexes, or the dividing of males and females. It was not to an intimate act of a behavior between the two, but the word literally meant a dividing of the two. It was to distinguish the male gender from the female gender. And that is the basic fundamental definition of the word sex. When we look at the word sex just a little bit further, keep in mind that sex more precisely involves the development of the individual's completeness as a person rather than an act to be performed. Think about filling out documents, applying for a loan, or applying for a license. Many times there are questions of all types on those applications: date of birth, address, place where you were born. But then there are also questions such as the sex of the applicant. People normally answer either male or female. People normally do not answer on those questionnaires yes or no when they see the word sex. It is almost commonly understood that sex means gender, not performance. Somehow the definition has been shifted, and when people hear the word sex, it means something completely foreign to what it was intended to mean. So when you see the word sex, or when you hear the term sex, first make sure there is a clarity of what sex means. It's a dividing of the genders, the gender of male from the gender of female. It is a separation of the two. So it's either going to be the sex male or the sex female, not the performance or the actions between the two as it relates to intercourse. That is not the working definition of the word. In the Bible, in the book of Luke, the 2nd chapter, beginning at verse number 52, the Bible talks about the well-roundedness, the completeness of an individual, and how that well-rounded individual and how that person perfects, and how that person continues to improve, and how that person continues to grow as an individual sexual being is a more useful definition, whether it's used in the male gender or the female gender. Listen to the text of Luke 2, beginning at verse number 52. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. Many call this the fourfold growth of Jesus, but it completes who he is as an individual. It separates him from all others. It is not a performance with someone else. It is the development totally of who he is. The word increased in verse 52 means to beat forward, to lengthen. The objective is for Jesus to lengthen, to develop, to mature, to move into the fullness of what God sent him for, to move into the fullness of the lives of the people, to develop in a fourfold way. He continually excelled in wisdom. He continually grew from birth to his death. He continually grew in his approval with God. Everything he did was good and very good. His whole objective was to please the Father and to do his will. And as he pleased the Father and did the will of the Father, he also increased in favor with man. He blessed man. He healed man. He fed men. He raised men from the dead. He consoled them when no one else could console them. He cast evil spirits out of them. So you see the development. Not any imperfections that had to be overcome, but he continually focused on who he was as a God sent. That term increase also has the meaning of advancement. He continually moved forward as the Christ. It also carries the meaning promote. He increased. He promoted heaven. He promoted God. He promoted the purpose of heaven. He promoted the purpose and the will of God. And in doing so, he was a blessing, not only to heaven, but he was a blessing to himself. Because in the process of being a total being of who he was also preparing himself to be the atonement for the sins of mankind. But in terms of being the atonement for sins of mankind, he was also preparing himself to be received back up into heaven by his Father who sent him. So you're looking at the completeness, the wholeness, the moving forwardness. That's what sex that's what sex is all about. It's not an interaction in a vulgar way or a sensuous way that we see it in the world, but it's more of the development of an individual and the separation of the male from the female, and yet when they both are complete and they both are moving toward maturity, then they are ready for the two to become one. I'll see you back in class again next time. Don't be late and don't skip class.